The city of Houston breathes a particular kind of heat in early March. It's not the full, oppressive blanket of summer yet, but a damp, clinging warmth that promises it's on the way. In a modest house on a street where the noise of the city feels a few blocks away, a routine is about to fracture. It's the morning of Thursday, March 6, 2014. 24-year-old Britney Cosby is getting ready for her shift at Starbucks. Her girlfriend of 2 years, 24-year-old Crystal Jackson, is there too, helping get Crystal's 5-year-old daughter, Zena, ready for school. The air in the house is already thick, and it's not from the weather. Britney's father, James Cosby, is home. He's been out of prison for 5 months, sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room that has become his bedroom. The tension isn't new. James is a devout Muslim with a long, violent criminal record, a registered sex offender. He disapproves vehemently of his daughter's relationship with another woman. He calls it a sin, an abomination. But his hatred runs deeper than scripture. There's a seething jealousy there. Britney, the child he was never truly there for, has her life together. She has a steady job. She's responsible. And just days ago, with her great-grandmother Annie co-signing, Britney bought a shiny silver 2006 Kia Sorento SUV. It's parked outside, a symbol of everything James doesn't have. He's been asking to use it. She's been saying no. The morning unfolds with a brittle normalcy. Crystal buckles Zena into her car seat in the new Kia, the little girl clutching her backpack. Something is forgotten inside. Crystal tells Zena she'll be right back and walks back towards the house. Inside, an argument ignites. It's likely about the car, about the relationship, about years of resentment simmering in a pot James has kept on a high boil. It escalates fast. James strikes Britney in the face. She falls. The rage, the pure, unfiltered hatred takes over. He hits her again, and again. He finds an object, a hammer perhaps, something heavy and solid from the clutter of the room. He brings it down on her head. The sound is not like in the movies. It's a sickening, wet thud. He does it until her skull fractures, but he's not done. He wraps his hands around her throat and squeezes the life out of her, his own daughter, there on the floor of the room where he sleeps. The blood is everywhere. It soaks into the carpet, spatters onto a speaker, a chair, his own shoes. At that moment, Crystal walks back in. She sees the nightmare. She sees Britney on the floor. She sees James covered in violence. Her survival instinct screams. She turns and runs back out the front door, a scream caught in her throat. She's almost to the car, to her daughter. James grabs a gun. He doesn't chase her far. He steps to the window, raises the weapon, and fires a single shot at point-blank range. The window blind is down. The bullet tears through the thin slats, carrying with it a fine mist of blood. Crystal Jackson collapses. The loud pop echoes, then fades into the hum of the neighborhood. Inside the Kia, 5-year-old Zena ducks down in her car seat. She has just heard her mother get killed. The world has gone silent and terribly, terribly wrong. James Cosby stands in the sudden quiet. The heat of the rage is cooling, leaving behind the cold, logistical mess of what he has done. 2 bodies. One is his child. He has to think. He leaves Zena, a terrified witness he seems to barely register, inside the house. He closes the door. He spends the day with his girlfriend, Kimberly, acting as if the world hasn't ended. He goes about his business while his daughter and her girlfriend lie dead in and next to the home he shares with them. The blood in the living room begins to set. As evening falls on the Gulf Coast, he returns. The practical work begins. He wraps Britney's head in a bedsheet, his bedsheet, perhaps because he can't bear to look at her face, or perhaps just to contain the evidence. He drags the bodies out and loads them into the back of Britney's new Kia Sorento. They are heavy with the awful weight of death. He stacks them like luggage. He gets behind the wheel. With Zena now left alone in the house, he points the car southeast, driving over an hour through the dark Texas night towards the Gulf of Mexico, towards the Believer Peninsula. His destination is a lonely utilitarian place, the shared dumpster area behind the Fisherman's Cove Food Mart in Port Bolivar, next to a shuttered motel. It's a spot for discarding things. To James Cosby, that's all they are now, things to be discarded. He pulls the bodies from the SUV and dumps them unceremoniously behind the trash bins. He throws out the bloody window blind from the house. He tosses a note he'd written with Britney's name and address. He does not hide them. He simply throws them away. He then gets back in the car and drives another hour north, not home, but to a strip club called the Ritz in Houston. He parks Britney's car in the lot. He walks to a nearby Whataburger, the iconic Texas burger joint with its orange and white stripes glowing in the night. He calls Kimberly to come pick him up. Then, with a chilling audacity, he dials 911. He reports calmly that Kimberly's ex-boyfriend had just tried to run them off the road. He gives his name to the operator. That call, that little performance, will become a critical mistake. It gives investigators a timestamp and a location pin for his phone, placing him miles from home in the middle of the night, and it will lead them directly to the missing SUV. The next morning, Friday, March the 7th, a Budweiser delivery man making his early rounds at the Fisherman's Cove Food Mart walks to the dumpster to throw away some empty boxes. He sees a foot, then a leg. He runs back into the store, his face pale, and tells the owner to call 911. Galveston County deputies arrive to a grim scene. 2 young women, brutally beaten, 1 shot, left like trash. There's very little blood at the dumpster site. They've been killed elsewhere. The only clues are that bloody window blind and the note. The blind holds a single perfect fingerprint. The investigation explodes in 2 directions. In Galveston, they process the scene and broadcast a description of the victim's missing silver Kia. In Houston, detectives break the unbearable news to families. They go to Britney's house. They meet the stoic, elderly Annie. They meet James Cosby, who arrives home and performs the role of a grieving, confused father. "What happened?" he asks, his face a mask. "That's what we're trying to find out," a detective replies, already watching him closely. They note a window blind is missing from a living room window. James blames an old contractor named Pepe. When they find Pepe, he's frail, using a cane. He couldn't have done this. The detectives' focus tightens. They speak to Crystal's parents. Her father, Ivan, a pastor, is raw with grief. He admits he struggled with his daughter's sexuality, but his love for her is absolute. "I love my little bee too much to ever hurt her," he says. He gives them his gun for testing. It won't match. The fingerprint from the blind comes back. It's a hit in the database. James Larry Cosby Jr. The father is now the prime suspect. They get a warrant and search the house. With Annie's permission, they look around. The living room is too clean in spots. New mismatched rugs are laid down. In the yard, a pile of bricks looks oddly placed. A detective lifts one. Underneath, the soil is dark and stained with blood. They spray luminol in the living room, and the place erupts in an eerie blue glow. Blood is everywhere, on the floor, the walls, the furniture. They seize a hammer, shoes, the stained carpets, over 300 pieces of evidence. It is, one detective will say, the most evidence he's ever collected from a single scene. They track James's movements through his phone. The data paints a damning picture. From the house to the Boulevard Peninsula dump site, to the strip club, to the Whataburger. Ferry camera footage shows the silver Kia crossing to the peninsula. A toll booth attendant recalls a tall, nervous man driving it, asking about a headlight. He'd talked to him. That man was James Cosby, and in the back of that SUV, the women were already dead. James is brought in for questioning. For hours, he says nothing. Then they show him the evidence. "Can you explain to me how your print wound up on that blind where those bodies were recovered?" the detective asks. James blinks. "My print was on what?" They press him about the saturated blood in his room. They describe the sheet wrapped around Britney's head. His facade begins to crack under the weight of their facts. "You've been sleeping in that room with your daughter's blood on the carpet," the detective says, his voice low and disgusted. Finally, they lay it bare. "James, you did it. That is your own daughter. Look at this camera and show some remorse." He shows none. He is arrested for tampering with evidence, a holding charge while the case solidifies. The most heartbreaking interview comes later with the sole surviving eyewitness, 5-year-old Zena. A child forensic interviewer sits with her, gentle and patient. "Tell me what you heard," she asks. Zena describes a loud pop. She demonstrates a rustling, lashing sound. She says she saw a big man outside the car. She says she asked James where her mommy was, and he just shrugged and said she was probably in a room. He wouldn't let her check his room. Then he left her alone. Her testimony, simple and devastating, seals the sequence of events. The final physical piece is found a month later. The owner of the Ritz strip club, tired of an abandoned car taking up space, has the silver Kia towed. Police process it. The cargo area is a horror show, soaked in blood. A bullet fragment is recovered, and it contains Crystal Jackson's DNA. The murder weapon is never found, but it doesn't need to be. The case is built from a mountain of circumstantial evidence so high it becomes a wall. The motive is clear: a toxic stew of religious condemnation, jealousy, and hatred for who his daughter loved. In 2016, James Larry Cosby Jr. stood trial for capital murder. His attorneys argued there was no murder weapon, no clear motive. The prosecution didn't need one. They had the phone records, the fingerprint, the blood-soaked room, the ferry video, the dump site evidence, the car, and the testimony of a child. They painted a portrait of a man so consumed by bitterness he could slaughter his own child and her partner. The jury deliberated and returned with a guilty verdict. As this was a capital murder case in Texas, without the state seeking the death penalty, the sentence was automatic. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. His appeals have been denied. The aftermath is a story of enduring pain and fragile resilience. Xena is raised by Crystal's parents, Mary and Ivan. Ivan, the pastor who once struggled with his daughter's truth, now champions her memory and raises her little girl with love. Detective Dustin Kitts, who led the investigation, became so close to the families he is now Xena's godfather. The two families, bound by unspeakable loss, became one. At a vigil, a friend held a sign that read, "Love is love." It was a quiet rebuke to the hatred that started it all. Years later, a reporter asked a now older Xena how much she missed her mom. She thought for a second and replied, "Maybe the last number of all of the numbers. That's the highest number." A child's infinite measure of grief for a future stolen, not by a stranger, but by the very person who was supposed to provide safety. The story of Britney and Crystal is a stark American tragedy, a reminder that sometimes the deepest darkness doesn't lurk in shadows, but sits on the living room couch, waiting for an argument to begin.